What's going on, A-Push peeps? That little goondog, Andrew Jackson, he was an interesting man. He transformed national politics through Jacksonian democracy, and through that he polarized the nation, creating enemies and allies, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Hey fellas, here's just a side note. Welcome to the revised, most up-to-date 2.3 Adam Norris, patent pending, modernized and reviewed video. By the end of this video, you should be able to know and recall your favorite president, the questions you got wrong of the test, Andy's friends, and his enemies. Why did Andrew Jackson have so many enemies? Many of Andrew Jackson's enemies were just jealous of his flow, let's be honest. If you look at all the old pictures of him, he has such fluid hair with so much volume, and it was really rare in those days. So people were super jealous of it. Also, they just didn't agree with him politically, which means they were wrong. They were also losers who couldn't accept the fact that they were beaten in an election. They also hated democracy, which was Andrew Jackson's prime achievement and goal.
Enemy number 5, Nicholas Biddle. Dun dun dun. A Renaissance man accomplished in literature as well as finance, Biddle was the country's first central banker, and he was a master of his craft. Under his firm direction, the second bank grew into a powerful instrument of monetary stability, the rock upon which a decade of robust economic growth was built. But, for all his financial brilliance and managerial skill, Biddle had faults that proved to be fatal for the bank in his career. Arrogant, hypersensitive to criticism, and unschooled in politics, he failed when put to the test during the vitriolic battle between Biddle and President Andrew Jackson over the recharting of the bank. When Biddle was thrown into a political cauldron that Jackson stirred up during the bank war, he had personality flaws that worsened conflict and drove him to take extreme measures to save the bank. Biddle was excitable, self-important, and compulsively defensive about the bank and his image. His feelings never got the better of his manners, but often marred his judgment, said banking historian Bray Hammond. Moreover, he was politically inept, overplaying his hand at pivotal moments of his struggle with Jackson.
Friend number 5, New Orleans. Andrew Jackson is considered a hero in New Orleans because of his actions during the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, a war between the newly formed U.S. and Great Britain. Andrew Jackson was the general in charge of the American combatants during this battle, and what made this battle notable was that although the British forces were 3 times larger than Jackson's, he sustained an eighth of the casualties that the British forces did. As a result, this battle made Jackson a hero, not just in New Orleans, but practically everywhere. And also, the importance of it was that it prevented Britain from taking New Orleans, which is in and of itself was important because of its role as a port city, and it protected the rest of the land that was recently gained in the Louisiana Purchase.
Hey! Enemy number 4, the bank/printed money. Andrew Jackson was very suspicious of paper money. He thought it could be easily abused by government to abuse the civil rights and liberties of the people through inflation and other economic means. He saw the banks as the primary institution that allowed for this to happen. So he thought that the Bank of the United States was pretty evil and oppressing the common man, which was his electoral base. He also fought a huge war with Nicholas Biddle and a bunch of his anti-Jacksonian enemies that didn't want that to happen. What ended up happening is the bank was completely abolished, and it may or may not have had some economic impacts later on. Number 4, Manifest Destiny. One of Andrew Jackson's biggest friends and alliances was Colombia, which is that giant angel you see down there that helped our nation expand westward in what is known as Manifest Destiny. Part of Manifest Destiny was expanding westward and expanding the nation to its full potential and glory. He also admitted the all-important and wonderful states of Arkansas and Michigan, and he basically did all of the hard work for Florida. I mean, come on, he invaded it, he captured it for us. That's all the work you really need for a state. Honestly, the entire state of Florida should be named after him. He also wanted to see the nation expand economically and territorially. The only way he saw that this could be achieved was through physical expansion.
Number 3, John C. Calhoun. John and Andy had lots of beef, with Jackson even saying at one point that he'd like to hang Calhoun. Jackson and Calhoun had two major standoffs: the nullification crisis regarding an industrial protective tariff and the Petticoat Affair. Calhoun actually threatened to secede South Carolina from the Union over the tariff. In response to this, Jackson pushed for legislation that would allow him to collect duties using the armed forces. This, of course, was resolved with a compromise by Henry Clay. The Petticoat Affair consisted of Calhoun's wife agitating a bunch of other wives in Jackson's cabinet to ostracize the Secretary of State and his wife, which caused a lot of drama. This eventually led to the majority of Jackson's cabinet resigning, making Jackson hate Calhoun even more. It's a mystery why Jackson never killed Calhoun in a duel.
Number 3, white males. Andrew Jackson was like the Susan B. Anthony of white males, advocating for the political rights of all white males regardless of socioeconomic status. Though at the time of his presidency, universal white male suffrage was law in all but 3 states, the popularity of Jacksonian ideals changed the meaning of democracy in the popular American mind. Jackson was not fond of African Americans because he had slaves, and his notions about natives were at best hypocritical.
Number 2, Henry Clay. Ironically, Clay and Jackson were both political allies during the War of 1812. Clay was the leader of the Warhawks, a group who pushed President Madison to go to war. Jackson was made famous during this war at the Battle of New Orleans. However, Clay's opinions changed. He turned into a pacifist, coining the name Great Compromiser, which Jackson saw as selfish, as he saw it as using Clay to push himself forward. Clay also introduced the American system, which included the recharter of the Bank of the United States, higher protective tariffs, and internal improvements. Jackson was against all of this. He wasn't completely against the tariffs, but he didn't like them. He was for the common man, so he was strongly against the Bank of the United States. He saw internal improvements as unconstitutional due to the need for federal funding. This conflict is similar to Hamilton and Jefferson. This conflict reached a climax in the presidential elections of 1824 and 1832. In 1824, the election was known as the corrupt bargain. There were 4 candidates, but no one got the majority of the electoral votes. The following were candidates: Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. And the Constitution said if this happens, the top 3 candidates go to the Congress and they decide. Well, the top 3 candidates were Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and William Crawford. William Crawford died because he had a stroke. That's unfortunate. Henry Clay was 4th, so he didn't get to go to Congress. So it was between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. But Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House, so he pretty much got to choose who was president. And although Andrew Jackson had more votes than John Quincy Adams, he chose John Quincy Adams as president, and in return, he became Secretary of State. This was a little fishy situation, and that's why it was called the corrupt bargain. This tarnished Clay's legacy, and it's why he never became president. He lost the 1832 election and the 1844 election, where James K. Polk and Joseph Smith were candidates. In 1832, he fought just Andrew Jackson in the presidential election. This was called the Bank War election. It was all about the Bank of the United States. Clay was for it, Jackson was against it, and the Common Man campaign beat Clay, and the conflict reached a whole nother level, and the bank was not rechartered, and that led to an economic depression. Ironically, Clay and Jackson were on the same side at times. Clay chartered a tariff law in 1832, but South Carolina nullified that, and Jackson tried to use his federal power to send military troops down to South Carolina to stop the secession. But at the end of the day, if they got along at times, they still hated each other, and Jackson said when he left office, his one regret was that he didn't shoot Henry Clay. Number 2, James Knox Polk. James K. Polk and Andrew Jackson shared many similarities and characteristics. For starters, both were Tennessee politicians. Polk was actually family friends with Jackson. They agreed on all their policies. They were very for the Manifest Destiny. You saw that with Jackson's Indian Removal Act and the Mexican-American War with Polk. They were for states' rights and against the Bank of the United States. Later in politics, they both supported the annexation of Texas. So Polk was just seen as his natural successor, and they supported each other throughout their political career. As soon as Polk got into Congress, his first thing on his agenda was making sure a corrupt bargain never happened again. Polk voted for Jackson twice as president when he was part of the Tennessee state legislature, and Jackson appointed and supported Polk for the 1844 election for the Democratic Party. Overall, Polk was just the natural successor and protege of Andrew Jackson.
Solid.
Enemy number 1, Native Americans. Although it is true that Andrew Jackson had a long history of conflict with natives because of his role as a leader in the American Army, he has 2 very notable actions against the natives. The first one is the forced removal of the Cherokees. This one is notable because the case of their removal went all the way to the Supreme Court, who decided that they should keep their land, but Jackson ultimately denied this ruling and forced them out of their land, which actually caused the Trail of Tears, caused the deaths of thousands of Cherokees. And the second one is the passage of the Indian Removal Act. This act technically allowed Jackson to negotiate, quote unquote, with tribes for their lands, although these negotiations were often subject to bribery and threat. The Cherokees actually resisted this act, but to no avail. With these actions against the natives in mind by Andrew Jackson, it would seem that he was very prejudiced against them.
Friend number 1, the Common Man. The period from Jackson's inauguration as president up to the Civil War is known as the Jacksonia era, or the era of the rise of the common man. This period constituted great change in issues warranting debate, such as slavery, Indians, westward mobility, and balance of power between the executive and legislative branches of government. The United States had no strict class system. Most Americans identified themselves into the middle class. The common man now had the right to vote, without the distinction of owning land, nominating candidates to office, and rewarding the politicians that represented the common man's interest. The 1820s, a time of transition and transformation, called for men who could guide the people through a changeful age. The election of 1828 signaled a unique change. Never before had a man who had made his name and fortune inside the 13 colonies been elected to the office of president. As the spokesman of the common man, Jackson showed concern for issues such as farming and mechanic advancement, anti-banking, and egalitarian principles. It was these issues that aided Jackson in remaining popular with the common man ideals. Most farmers had no use for credit, and the coins or paper was ultimately favorable. Jackson also set out on a crusade against the Bank of the United States. He believed that the bank only profited the wealthy man. Therefore, a bank is of no use for democracy. If the common man cannot benefit from it, Jackson thus vetoed the recharge of the second bank. It is important to reflect upon that Jackson's actions forever changed the presidency. He marketed himself as a common man and also made the office of president the most powerful office in the 3 branches of government. Whoever the reader chooses to believe about Jackson's being a common or not so common man, there is an acknowledged truth that Jackson's election signaled a change in America, a man outside the confines of the upper echelons of society becoming president. However,
Why he did not like anyone besides his protege. The truth is Andrew Jackson didn't like anyone. He only loved his wife, killing people, and eating snails seasoned with salt. He also mightily enjoyed destroying evil institutions like banks that poisoned society and civilization. He also had a soft spot for publicly caning people. His favorite pastimes, however, was dueling. His favorite 2 partners were CIA-trained sniper bears, against whom he usually won. Some of his most notable achievements were writing a critique of the communist theory before Marx was born, inventing salt, sinking the Titanic, winning the Cold War, and running for president in 2020, where he lost to Kanye West by only 1 electoral vote. He also had 50,000 children, making him one of the most common genetic ancestors in America. Disclaimer, not actually factual.
A pushbag squad.